Okay, we'll make a start. Thank you for joining us for this fifth and final industry talk for the semester. Thank you to everyone who's turned up and asked questions, and to those of you who are catching up on the recordings through Canvas or on YouTube. I think it's been really fruitful to sort of hear from various people across all different roles and all different parts of media and what media is, and to, in part to be reassured that there is still an industry out there happening at this very odd and strange time, obviously, but, things are still rolling along, albeit from people's homes and that sort of thing. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest for today, who is Anna Kamasz. Anna is the Partner Manager, Australia and New Zealand for Google Arts and Culture, and we're going to unpack what that means in the chat to come. Anna is also part of our industry advisory committee for the undergrad and the postgrad media programs. So we're delighted to have you with us today, Anna, all the way from sunny Sydney. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. I have to say it's all the way from rainy Sydney today, unfortunately. Hopefully it's a bit better down there, but I am so excited to be joining you all and talking to you, I guess, about, my experience and the latest things that are happening in the industry, which is still happening, albeit with everything that is going on.
Yeah, great. So as always, if you have any questions that you want Anna to answer, just drop them in the chat box and we'll get to them a little bit later on. I guess I wanted to start, Anna, by asking, I sort of know a little bit about your current role and what you do with Google, but a bit more perhaps about your background and experience, where you've come from and how you came to be at Google, perhaps?
Yeah, cool. So, I think when we talk about my sort of industry, I think the first thing I really ask myself, which is a really hard one to get head around, is you could ask the question is, which industry am I working in? I find myself a little bit at the moment on this kind of outskirts, or probably what you could even say the slightly inner sanctum of multiple industries. So that being this sort of intersection area between arts and technology, with a little bit of thread of education and entertainment in there, primarily at the moment with a focus on cultural agencies. Where I came from, so I have always been a massive content consumer at an early age, which I feel is really been the foundation and inspiration for pretty much my entire career. Without the marks that I needed probably to go into the law and psych where I thought I'd find myself, I ended up following my natural passions. Did an arts, film, television and sociology degree with the expectation of becoming a film director. Not long realising I was probably going to be a much better producer per se. So after working for a series of years in sales management, fashion industry primarily, I started doing quite a lot of filmmaking courses on the side and doing a lot of work on friends' short films, particularly doing a lot of first AD work. In my 20s, I was very much interested in the industry, particularly the screen industry, and as they encourage you to do, I wrote a letter of interest to the National Film and Sound Archive one Christmas time, letting them know that I would love to volunteer, and it just so happened that they had a position coming up in the for which they asked if I wanted to interview for. Not long after, I actually found myself working for the National Film and Sound Archive in one of possibly the best jobs I ever thought could exist. I spent a lot of time researching collections, helping industry with audiovisual materials, learning, how to use Steenbeck's old audio recordings, and working to really help other content producers find materials that they needed, which gave me a really kind of great holistic view of the types of materials and content out there. Shortly after that, we found ourselves in what was probably the industry's greatest merger period. The National Film and Sound Archive moved into Australian Film Commission. At the time when digital education initiatives such as Screen Online really started coming to fruition, I actually ended up moving down to Melbourne to join the small group of documentary producers as part of Film Australia, who of course then went through their own merger with the Australian Film Commission again and the Film Finance Corporation, as well as the Australian Film Commission, who then lost the National Film and Sound Archive. So it was in this kind of time period where I got to work across various screen agencies that I really started to kind of expand, I guess, my knowledge and skills of the industry. During that time, I kind of transitioned into moving away from that executive production role and looking to start creating digital media for education markets throughout Australia. And around about 2 years later, with a wealth of those programs and connections under my belt, I ended up moving pretty much over to the Australian Children's Television Foundation, where I spent about several years working on partner education, excuse me, creating at the time multimedia, so DVD, CD-ROMs, moving through to website content, eventually apps. But really, as part of that, I was starting to look to probably move towards also more of a digital strategy kind of level. So I was working with the ACTF to produce their social media platforms, to look at marketing distribution outlets, building online distribution channels for our international broadcasters, and really just kind of developed pretty much a broader range of digital applications for screen content industries. It was about that time I kind of decided several years later to go out on my own and start freelancing, which was a fascinating, probably whole conversation in itself, that's met with its many challenges in the industry. But about 6 months in, was actually invited to go and work for Google as part of their arts and cultural network.
Yeah, wow. So a storied history with lots of different elements to it. It's interesting you mentioned. So what was your role at the National Film and Sound Archive? Were you an archivist or?
So I was on collection access, so the front-facing end. So more helping organisations or individual, whether it was producers, radio producers, search for content, so understand what collections they might have access to. It might have been the ABC or a news channel coming in, trying to find historical stock footage to represent in one of their news programs. It could be a filmmaker who's doing some background research. It was really helping to get, I guess, accessibility to that content in order to create other programs. In addition, office work, cash, the good things.
It's just interesting. I mean, archives are obviously a core part of, something that people maybe don't immediately think of when you think of media careers and that sort of thing. But certainly in Melbourne, we've got, things like the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, and even state libraries and national libraries have extensive audiovisual collections, and possibly even stuff that's maybe not on the shelves but is sort of kept apart because it's maybe on film or needs special conditions to be looked after. But it's an interesting area. So you came to Google. So did you start at Google in your current role?
Yes, I did. So so I've always been with Google Arts and Culture.
Okay, cool. And when was that? When did you start at Google?
This week, 3 years ago, actually.
Wow. Okay.
Was the first time I went to Google.
Yep. And so what is your current role? What does your current role involve? What is a partner manager?
Excellent question. So I was going to say the short of it is basically making culture accessible to global audiences anytime, anywhere. So as with Google's mission about making information accessible, my role is primarily to make culture accessible, and that through the lens of Australia and New Zealand, working with partnerships. What that kind of looks like and translates to is, to be honest, there's quite a lot in there. So number one is driving cultural partnerships. From day to day, I meet with executive teams. It could be curatorial teams. It could be digital marketing teams, trying to understand what collections they hold, what their operations are, and explore ways that we can support them with Google tools and technologies to create kind of unique content experiences that engage audiences globally through our platform. So that's sort of one element of almost the business side of it. Ultimately, we are an innovation partner at Google Arts and Culture. We work with not-for-profits, charitable organisations, and really what we're there to do is help coordinate and train up teams to understand what tools we have and use those tools. So it might be that we're arranging access to, we have like a gigapixel camera per se, we call the art camera, which is this high definition camera that allows us to present content online that's more than the naked eye can see. So we might send photographic teams out to collection institutions. It might be, as you know, we have street view teams to go into museums or cultural organisations to do collects internally in gallery spaces. We might be educating on how to create the best metadata those organisations need to provide for our search platforms to surface those collections. It could be up online to create immersive stories that really represent some of the materials and the stories that they hold within those collections, and also providing a bit of editorial feedback on that best practice for checking and publishing the content that goes live. In addition, so it doesn't stop there, in addition I work to produce and create supplementary materials, a lot of cultural content for programs that really reflect Australia and New Zealand, that support the work that our partners are doing. So that's both past and present. It could be short films, social media content, collaborating with our engineers to find cool new ways to use machine learning per se and technology to create meaning for that content, and basically providing new lenses into the cultural collections for our audiences. And in addition, of course, working internally. So I collaborate with cross-functional teams at Google, and that might be our YouTube teams, our creative lab teams, Google Pi, PR, marketing, government, maps, products, whoever it is, to really think about how we can align with initiatives going forwards, what content we can support development for, and also how we can champion that work through our channels.
So not much then.
It's not at all. So it's a little bit of a jack of all trades, and I think it's taking every sort of element of media and digital technology, entertainment expertise, and trying to work in this kind of middle section to align all of the above.
So can you give us some examples of some of the partners that you work with in Australia and New Zealand? Yeah.
So we currently we've got about 75 launch partners across Australia and New Zealand, and I'm working with over about 100 at the moment. We have the Sydney Opera House, of course, places like the Art Gallery of New South Wales, National Gallery of Victoria, the National Portrait Gallery, a lot of the major partners, but we also like to make sure that we've got some unique partners in there too. So one project I suggest you highly take a look at was last year I did an Australian sports launch, which I can talk a little bit about later. But it was a unique opportunity to bring on some varying collections, not just art collections through the platform, but looking at things like the Bradman Museum, bringing on their cricket bat collections and their historical collections through there, working with the National Sports Museum, and a number of also sort of alternative, contemporary and smaller institutional partners throughout all the various states and territories as well.
Yeah, wow. So, what's it like to work for Google?
I have to say it's probably been one of the most exciting, creative, challenging, hardworking, highly productive, which is probably why you see us all running around in those little kicks that we have. We want to move fast, and I do drink a lot of coffee. Overall, I have to say it's an incredibly great environment to work in, and whether that's on site or remotely, which is obviously what we do a lot of at the moment. I think it's a really unique space. I get to collaborate with an incredibly diverse set of teams, an incredible, I was going to say a diverse set of minds as well who work across the business, who I'd probably never expect I'd have the opportunity to work with. I get to work with the latest technologies and to have insight into that, and possibly even at times contribute to that development. And I have the opportunity to support, partners with tools, both externally and internally, and learn a lot from peers. And I'm extremely lucky to be sitting in a position at Google whereby we're helping to work to support the arts industry more generally through their own environments and through ours. So yeah, incredibly amazing experience, creative and challenging, but also at the end of the day, it is like every other business, I can say it is a job, but it's also a very inspiring one. Yeah,
cool. So you've been in your current role 3 years, you said, which, it's the length of a degree. It doesn't seem like a very long period of time, but I'm sure it is in Google time. I'm sure it's an incredibly long span of time. So has anything, what has changed in terms of your role, or in terms of maybe the things that Google's looking at, new technologies, things that people are excited about? What's come up in your role and your access to the company in that time? You mentioned machine learning at one point. Yeah.
Machine learning, very much something at the moment that has had quite an impact on particularly search discoverability, but also looking at how we can create as I said, new meanings from collections. For me, that's really interesting, looking at that from a potentially kind of artistic perspective. You know, once we have the information in there and we have imagery, how can we take these tools and think about, you know, finding new meanings or connections across collections. So we have about 5 million objects plus in the Google Arts and Culture platform in the back end, which is a really unique opportunity to start thinking about, you know, how those intersect. And if you go onto our platform, you'll see an experiments tab, and the experiments tab is some of the latest technologies that we've actually applied to figure out, you know, those sorts of intersections and those connections, but also then work the opposite direction, whereby, you know, how can we be creative and think about applying these technologies to create a really interesting experience, per se. So at the moment, you might see, if you go into our app, you'll see a couple of new platform sort of experiments in there that have been included. You may have seen a few years ago, we launched the art selfie, where you could take a photo of yourself and match it with a portrait around the world. And that's just a really nice, fun, insightful way for people to discover artworks in a slightly different manner. We've most recently done art transfers, so you can take the work per se of someone like Van Gogh, and you can take your photo in your phone and you can apply that over the top. And it just, you know, gives audiences a new way to kind of explore the meaning behind those works using technology as well.
Yeah, cool. So
Yeah.
Apart from that, what are some of the latest things that you've been working on?
So obviously at Google Arts and Culture, we have been working with partners in collaboration to get their content online, specifically even more so during COVID. One thing we've really been looking at is changing from really focusing around arts, culture, to broadening this definition of what culture is in more general. So, you know, what was traditionally maybe once, you know, high-end arts project that looked very much at sort of paintings and artworks. Over the years, we've moved forward to thinking about making more cultural accessibility, and what does culture mean, from art to history to archaeology. More recently, we've been looking at architecture, food, gastronomy. We've done some great projects in Japan and Spain, but most recently, the one that I've been looking at is sport from an Australian perspective, and thinking about, you know, why isn't Sir John Bradman's bat, say, his first bat he ever got, that he wrote on, why is that not necessarily as important to our culture as it is to something like the Mona Lisa overseas? So we've really been broadening that definition for audiences to make that cultural accessibility, but also there being kind of more of an alignment with kind of, you know, where we are in popular culture, say right now. In addition, I think partially what's happened is probably a hell of a lot of growth has happened through, that's not just audiences, but particularly through the amount of partners we've been working on cultural collections with, and the amount of organisations we're trying to engage. So we're over 2,000 institutions now in about 85 different countries, and we're continuing to grow that every single year and work with a diverse range of partners that we can. So from that kind of growth comes a lot of kind of other opportunities as well to work at that intersection.
Yeah, wow, lots going on.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit in some of these talks around creative fields, but also, you know, cultural industries fields, or perhaps like creative adjacent. So maybe not the more traditional roles that you would think about from a film and media point of view, like a writer, director, cinematographer, editor, but maybe, you know, working with something like an archive, or working for a film funding body, or working for, you know, someone like Google in the kind of role that you have. So what in your opinion are some of the opportunities and challenges of working in, you know, a cultural industries field or a creative adjacent field?
Look, I think the unique opportunity is to be able to work across a series of very, what have been seen to be traditionally different operational styles. I think every single industry comes with its own quirks, it comes with its own processes, it comes with its own style and methods of working. Some of them, you know, different speeds, different technology applications in different industries. So where it really sits is this unique position of helping to try and firstly learn from and understand all of the different elements of the industries, and figuring out a great way to kind of align with all of them. So what this does, I feel, is it creates a little bit of room for challenge, positive and negative, obviously, in the ways that you're trying to work across the different industries, but also there's really great space for experimentation, whereby what seemed to once be separate can sometimes now be a really great opportunity for organisations and industries to get together and think about how they can learn from each other and what they can create in that space between the ways they traditionally work. I feel a little bit in my role at the moment as I would say I'm a bit of a cultural whisperer, or maybe a Google translator for want of a better term, to try and find that space that honours both sides of the equation. So I would say there's positive and negative both. To be kind of stereotypical, you might say the tech and online industry is really challenging to meet changing technology and audience demands really, really quickly, and that expectation is that you do move fast. But then again, you might be working in the cultural sector, say, where there's a lot more of a kind of a curation process and a strategy, although sometimes, honestly, that speed thing can be a little bit of a myth, and some of them are incredibly producing things very quickly beyond expectations, but really starting to learn the different methods and the styles, whether it's the speeds, they're working on completely different approaches to similar things. I think it's really an incredible way to learn that in that creative space, different viewpoints, different ways of approaching that creativity to be able to then maybe look to unique opportunities to present that. So I think, the cultural industry sector in itself, I'm met with so many challenges, I have to say, of their own. So there's the usual traditional things like copyright, who owns it, can we use this? Have we got the ability now to think about how we utilize works in a new creative or digital way, and do we have the rights to be able to do that? There's also cultural sensitivities for all of us involved that we need to think about when we're creating new projects, and the usual things like budget and staff and limitations. So really this kind of unique opportunity is thinking about different ways of learning and engaging with each other, and then also bringing resources from each of those different industries that we might have into kind of a different industry to think about how we might be able to apply it and work in slightly different ways to create new projects.
Yeah, cool. Just as always, if you have any, if anyone has any questions that you would like to ask Anna, please drop them in the chat box as we're going, and we'll get to them shortly. Having gone through all the things you've just gone through in terms of adapting to changing situations and learning to work with different operational styles and all that sort of thing, I'm sure we have a number of students who are potentially interested in working in cultural industries, in media-focused roles, in cultural institutions like galleries or archives or libraries or whatever it might be. What are some of the skills that students should look to bolster, to pick up, to work into some of their assessments or to pick up on their own?
Yep, cool. I have absolutely no doubt your media students are some of the most creative minds at the moment, and they've probably got an incredible, huge amount of understanding of technology skills and how to kind of use devices. So things I would suggest that would really help amplify where they're heading towards in that sense of purpose. You can never do enough learning. One area I think is really, really important is to understand kind of online audience, small business model, how you can actually work to get your, like I was going to say, how do you work to create a sort of a business, get your audience visibility out there and use digital platforms. So one thing I would suggest having a look at is something like Google Digital Garage. That is a really incredible tool to pick up in your spare time. And what it is looking at lessons and insight, learning how to optimize your business. It has understandings of things like basic coding, learning public speaking importance, machine learning, what is it, what is business communication, how to communicate ideas through story, design, etc. So really simple kind of models that think about various kind of general skills that are really important to scaffolding the general experience that you have in terms of actual media production in itself. I think in this day and age, even more so obviously with COVID, there's a lot of movement towards the online and being able to have, business visibility, have your own personal kind of portfolio, being able to understand platforms. You don't have to have every single skill. I multiple times have tried to learn coding. I have very, very basic areas in that. There's things that I'm great at and I'm a generalist at, but I think to have a little bit of that kind of wide scope and understanding of various media and the various platforms and various business models, I think is something that's really, really significant for anyone who is learning and coming through into any of the media industries. Number two, I just want to say, which is a little bit harder at the moment, is networking and negotiation. Networking, I would say, if once things open, there's some incredible organizations where I think so much inspiration just comes from people, meeting people and placing yourself in a situation where you can see what other people are doing in the current situation from their business. Things like excuse my language, but fuck up nights in Melbourne, a great one. So a platform every single month where you can go there and you can hear about how people got it completely wrong in their business, what they're doing, and just learn that we're all human, what we're going through, and how that works. Also a great opportunity to meet people. Number two, if you can't do that, think about finding a mentor, even someone like myself, someone in the business. If it's private, sign an NDA, ask them if you can just hang out for a little while. That you can join, but finding that kind of understanding and sense of purpose and just continuing to learn and put yourself in a little bit of experience so you can get visibility as to what's going on, I think is so important right now as well. And just keep the communication channels open.
Is there anything that you wish you'd known before you got
everything.
into your current?
Yes and no. Oh gosh. Look, I think one thing that I struggle with personally throughout my career is I'm someone who likes to learn everything. I think you get to the point where, I want to know everything that happened to have this. And I think after a while you start learning to realize that there's insight, and then there's you can't do everything, you can't have everything. But I think positioning your place in a space where you're willing to learn and you're open to kind of opportunities, and you realize that you can't be all, end all, be part of all, I think is a place that you eventually learn to kind of be okay with. But I mean, myself, I would have loved to, and it's a hard thing, I would have loved to code. I would love to do more coding, be able to produce my own sites, but I've learned to produce content. I have a very basic understanding of what that is, what that means, how that works. I just can't do the scripting myself, but I'm going to live with the fact that it's going to move faster than my ability to probably learn it. And there's so many different areas of coding as well that, we could be learning. So I'll just keep doing what I can.
The place where you work is probably not short of people who know one or two things about that, I'm sure.
It's not. And I think, look, it's interesting. I think you get a little thrown in the deep end. There's stuff that I have incredible visibility and support channels in the office whose skill sets are so incredible. Like they are so high. And they'll email you something and say, here, why don't you just check this out? And you get this email back that you just look at and you just think, wow, I'm going to go get a coffee, I'm going to come back, and then I'm going to research what this email basically means. But it's like learning a language, and it's like anything. I think if you have enough excitement and interest in it and you're wanting to kind of learn a little bit more, there are lots of those opportunities. But then at the same time, it's okay if you can't learn everything.
Yeah. I don't think we can ignore what's currently going on at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's sort of been a bit of the fact that we're now speaking digitally has meant that, we have to talk about what's going on. How has COVID affected, Google in its day-to-day and your role and your day-to-day?
Well, my day-to-day has changed in the sense that I now work from my dining room table. One of the really interesting things for us at Google is we are one of those companies who has been equipped to do a lot of online interaction. We already do a lot of our business could be either work from home, it could be remote. Traditionally there's been a lot of travel, etc. So business for us has very much been moving to home, which I think has created this space for us to think a little bit more about probably more where your personal creativity and your boundaries come from on a day-to-day basis. I am the only one actually sitting in Australia in my team. So I actually work to my managers in France, and the rest of my curatorial team is currently sitting in the UK. So for me, I've always been doing a lot of remote activity, but what I do miss is being able to go into the office, have those hallway conversations, be able to kind of network, communicate, just see what's going on in those day-to-day office activities, which is obviously a shame right now. On the plus side, I think because we are in Australia, I've been very privileged to be able to take this as an opportunity to kind of step back and take the foot off the gas and think about what is it that we're doing. Is there an opportunity here to really assess and evaluate how we work, how we create new products? Are we in a space right now whereby, we're more reactive and panicking as opposed to finding a little bit of a new way of creating meaning? At Google, you might see most recently the Creative Lab's done some research and experimentation with smaller arts organisations, and they've been looking at new ways of theatre to produce through YouTube, for example, with chat integration kind of thing. So thinking about, is there ways that we can experiment during this time while we have the opportunity to find new media ops for moving forwards? But then at the same time thinking about, from a personal reflection point of view, is what does work mean to you? What does your day-to-day look like? Do we have boundaries? How do we have this sense of enough insecurity to keep us motivated, but at the same time enough sort of security from day to day to feel like we're in a place to make that happen? So obviously there's a lot of challenges, a lot of questions. Work has very much been quite reactive at the moment. There's a lot of organisations we're trying to help get online, move into a digital space. Google's very much about figuring out how we can be the most helpful with our tools and technologies, particularly to the arts at the moment, who have been struggling locally, and figuring out, on a day-to-day basis with all of the flux, how we can best use our tools and our expertise to support organisations to be able to continue their operations as well.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a few questions dropping in here.
Cool.
Mark, first of all, has raised something that I was going to ask you about, which is that Google is a for-profit business. It is an omnipresent figure in the business world and in the online space and so on. And obviously many people in the arts and cultural sector may feel uncomfortable with, a for-profit sort of position. So how does Google negotiate this difference in sort of working between, what may be seen as sort of the cultural side of things versus the economic and industrial side of things?
Yeah, look, I think, as I said, I'm in a really lovely, unique position where I work in the not-for-profit part of Google. But obviously Google is a technology, it is advertising and it is sales platform as well. I think one thing, particularly for me, working with the cultural organisations, is this open dialogue about and understanding about really showcasing and sharing with cultural institutions what it is that we do, and being completely open and transparent in our discussions. We, as part of Google Arts and Culture, it's really, as I said, we're an innovation partner. So what we're there to do is think about, the tools and the technologies that we would normally use for our products. We have these on hand, and what we really want to do is support cultural organisations to utilise our platforms and to utilise those technologies. So it's a completely free service that we work through on the Google Arts and Culture side. And really, the best way for us to sort of explore this is really working with the cultural organisations firsthand. So I will, go and chat with them, and part of that process is them understanding what it is that we can offer. I don't want to tell them what to do. I want to be able to go into there and offer them the services of, our tools and our technologies, and see what it is that from Google's perspective we can bring to these organisations that will support them with their own stories and their own operations as well, beyond. So I'm not sure if that quite answers the question, but
yeah, I think the fact that Google is it's just such an all-encompassing thing. So to think about it in terms of different structures, and there's different parts of it that do different things. And
I think, look, in media, probably what you do see is a lot of the one side of the IT business and kind of that big, what was traditionally, and the startup kind of company style. I think in Australia, what's becoming more and more prevalent for audiences probably is the work that we're doing uniquely on the ground to support agencies. So, we're really thinking about, we're human beings. We're really there on the ground thinking about what our local partners need, and how we can support them through those ways as well.
Has any of that stuff changed or evolved, or with COVID? Have you sort of been reaching out to partners and seeing what
Yeah.
they're up to? And
Yeah, of
yeah,
course. I mean, part of it is really staying abreast of, how they are. I've had, it's almost been a couple of different responses to the crisis. Number one is some organisations, are really trying to make sure that they don't lose their audiences and they want to get online and continue to have their programs that they've seen. I mean, some of them have been working so hard behind the scenes to get exhibitions in, international exhibitions. I'm working closely with the Biennale of Sydney, who unfortunately 7 days into their millions of dollars of programming across several Sydney sites has had to, close its doors to audiences. So, we're working to see how at Google we can use the tools and technologies we have, the expertise. We've had some areas of the business completely pivot to think about, number one, understanding the audiences at the moment and the industry, so particularly arts and small business, really engaging with them and going through a series of conversations to see how they are, what they're doing and what support they need, and then reacting to providing any support that we can. So I'm continually reaching out to the organisations to do this. And we've also created, in response to this, you might see online, there's some additional resources, some digital toolkits that we've created beyond our standard partnerships to support partners, for example, in performing online through things like not just Google platforms, YouTube channels, but even how to integrate Zoom. Are there some, digital switches or things that make your video content when you're presenting live a little bit more funky? Any extensions that you can add in? We've also created a Connected to Culture for cultural organisations to think about more generally across social platforms and the internet, how they can be engaging their audiences through this time of change as well.
yeah, wow. There's just a follow-up question here around,
Yeah.
Google's not for profit. Sorry, Google Arts and Culture isn't for profit, so you aren't necessarily looking for a business case in everything that you do.
No, we're not. So,
Mm.
look, for me, as I say, it's this kind of really lovely position where it's really about supporting cultural industry. I'm not looking for a business case. What I'm really looking to do is understanding what challenges exist out in the industry at the moment through arts and the cultural orgs, and also just providing them, as I said, with accessibility into any of the technologies that we may have that they might like to utilise for their organisations as well.
Yeah, we've got a few questions here around. I sort of sold this talk on the fact that you worked at Google, so it was kind of
Yeah.
inevitable that there'd be some questions around sort of the working culture and so on. And obviously, there's all sorts of books and articles around what the working culture is like. So how I think one of the things that I read in the past was that there's kind of time allocated in the day for Google employees to kind of work on their own ideas or something. I don't know if that's fallen through since the GFC or things like that. But the main question is how a workday is structured. How flexible is Google with work times? Are there times of day that are more productive, perhaps? Do they sort of factor things like that in? How do you avoid work creep before and during COVID-19? Speak, Oracle.
Well, look, I can only talk from my own experience. I don't agree or disagree probably with some of those comments about how we do work. I actually think it's really unique and independent experience for everybody in there. Obviously, we do have a normal sort of Monday to Friday, supposed 9 to 5 work life like everybody else. I guess we probably have a little bit more fluidity and flexibility of what that means depending who you are, what team you work in. So I guess for myself, as I said, I am the only one in the country in my team. So really a lot of my own time, and I think this has actually been quite an interesting challenge when I came to Google, is there is so much sort of excitement and passion around what you want to do. There is so much to learn. You're working with a really great range of people. So of course, there's already that natural enthusiasm to be at work. We do have lovely offices that encourage kind of the ability to have space to be creative and space to think. We've got supportive services. We have an incredible food team, as you probably all know, that help feed us and give us kitchens and lovely things to make sure that we don't have to concern ourselves every single day with allocating sort of, additional time to sort of cooking and, going off site. It's almost like a one ecosystem that really allows you to pick and choose, I would say, how you would like to structure your own day. We do, lots and lots of meetings, I do have to say. One thing that I really loved, which sometimes sometimes don't hold up as well anymore, is schedule in the 20 or the 25-minute meeting, not the half hour, or the 50-minute meeting, not the hour. To give you time to reflect, follow up, or at least change venue sites, and trying to keep, where possible, things succinct. But also at the same time, we have a really great array of kind of ways to encourage each other to catch up regularly. So, doing one-on-one kind of conversations with your managers, organising, we have ninja lunches if you want to, where you can sign up and just meet a completely random person in the organisation. So on site, there's a lot of opportunities for you to structure your own personal work time as you normally would with the business, but thinking about ways in which you can kind of utilize the service and support to bring out the best in how you prefer to work. Moving to the flip side now, which is whereby obviously we are quite highly connected from day to day, and I'm now working at home. Previously, it was important for me to, I think, establish guidelines around when I work, particularly because my team is international. And to be completely honest with you, it can be quite challenging to, as you're finishing work and wrapping up, is exactly when everybody else is starting and suddenly starting to respond to all your emails. So it can be a little bit kind of enticing to want to kind of stay later and deal with that, so you don't wake up the next morning and you have 55 kind of new emails in your inbox from urgent overseas work responses. So sort of managing that and being okay with dedicating particular time to making things happen in a reasonable time frame for yourself, being very mindful of the way others work as well. So I think one important thing is we are very mindful that not everybody works in exactly the same way, and we are open to allowing other people to be a little bit more flexible in their own sense. So just because you're working one particular way doesn't necessarily mean the other person thrives in the same way. So we like to try and come to some form of kind of collaborative agreement as to the best ways to sort of work there. But at home, which I've kind of avoided at the moment, is this incredible sense of no home work-life boundaries that we're suffering at the moment. And I can say that mine has gone out on a day-to-day basis. I have done really well at this, and I have not done very well at all. I think there's such a wonderful part of routine in a day that gives you a sense of a mind break, that allows you to be a little bit more creative, that takes you into a space that not only creates those boundaries, but allows you to go through the processes, whether it's emotional or thought, physical, on a day-to-day basis. It really helps you redefine your day and your activities and your proactivity. One of the things in that I also found is your ability to now recognize within yourself how much procrastination time is built into a day when you are out and about. So for me, it's really making sure that I do schedule into my diary. Number one is, exercise. Number two is work hours. I do email blocks in my diary so no one interrupts me at particular times, so I can make sure I have that time to myself. We quite frequently will put DNS, a do not schedule. So I have a restriction from, unless it's absolutely urgent, from 6 p.m. at night, I'm not accessible unless we need to do some international meetings, and I have exceptions around that. I'll schedule in 1 or 2 nighttime syncs a week, just to have a quick catch up or a coffee catch up. Not that it's really coffee at that stage, with international colleagues, to make sure that they have my time as well, but really being structured. And it's okay to say no around particular working times to make sure that you give yourself that space, and a special space that you need as well, is really important.
Yeah, all good tips.
Yeah.
I guess you've mentioned creativity a few times, so I think I just wanted to step back and follow up on that a little bit around in a role which you're a partner manager, you're dealing with clients, you're dealing with you're doing office work and you're doing calls and that sort of things. Where do you in your role have space to exercise your creativity? I think it's going to be something that might come up certainly for students Once they
Yeah.
leave, they might fall into a marketing role, which is kind of a bit rote and a bit samey same. It might be a bit more corporate, perhaps. What's the role of creativity? Where does that fall into your day to day?
Right now, I don't know. It's a really interesting question, and I think it varies depending on person as to when and how they find that creativity. I've been finding recently I haven't, because I've been so reactive, I think I haven't carved out enough time in that space to really sit down and think about moving forwards on some projects. What is absolutely the time needed to come up with this really interesting sort of, creative process and creation for new content. As I said, because at the moment we are being very, very reactive to our environments around us, there's been a lot of flux, particularly among the industry, and we're always really challenging ourselves to do everything that we can to support this. From a business level, we had some really great advice from our internal management teams who basically said, take some time out for yourself. You, number one, are the most important thing in this whole entire process of everything that's going on. And I think that is exactly true for where we need to start thinking about carving out time for creativity. For me, number one is about giving myself a space and the time to put everything else aside and really just, work through even just writing down, or I'm a bit of a whiteboarder sort of style person, to sit there and think about cool and creative stuff, and secondarily shower. Shower thinking for me is another really great place that I can find myself start to remove those other boundaries. The next thing, which I think is really challenging at the moment, is probably finding space with others to bounce ideas off. And I think that is where probably we're struggling a lot at the moment in terms of the new situation. It's definitely amazing to have these kinds of catch-ups, but it doesn't necessarily replace that face-to-face and that ability to just kind of hang out with people, explore that creativity as well. So I think that's something that's really important, is to find a way to carve that and put that into your time as well. So I end up doing a catch up on Zoom or something once a week with a bunch of ex-industry friends who are all different types. We just hang out and see where we're at, and if necessary, we kind of catch up on some of the cool things that we've seen in the media, and we just kind of use that as a bouncing off platform for one another as well. So number one is making the time. Number two is providing space with people that you feel confident that you can challenge ideas off or bounce ideas off. And then obviously then it comes to making that time to sort of execute some of those ideas as well.
Yeah. And in terms of, the other question was around, once you've sort of been creative, once you've sort of had that idea, we've talked a little bit in some of these talks around communication and around packaging ideas and around selling yourself and kind of all that stuff. What sort of tips or tricks or suggestions in terms of, it is easy when you look at a whiteboard, when you've put all the bubbles up on the whiteboard, to go, oh, that's the perfect picture of what I want to do. But you bring someone else in and they just sort of have no idea what's going on.
Yep.
What, in terms of packaging an idea to pass on to a supervisor or to a producer or to, someone with money, or, what helps you do that? What are some of the steps that you go through in terms of communicating that?
Look, normally for projects that we do, and we do the same internal pitching as if we're externally pitching to try and get partners on board to work on a particular theme or process. Number one, a great one-pager. To be honest with you, nobody wants pages and pages and pages of content, a nice few visuals, a succinct kind of, this is what I'm working towards, a couple of maybe ways of who's involved, how we might execute this, quite high level, something that's a little bit kind of short, attention grabbing, but doesn't specifically define to the nth degree what you're looking to do, is really, really great right now. What I'm finding is, particularly among all the organizations, if you are sending too much documentation, everybody is overwhelmed. There's so much noise, yet so much silence. Nobody wants to read another document. They don't want to, shuffle through a whole lot of content. So, a great one-pager, possibly a supporting. So we do decks. So using Google Slides, you might have half a dozen deck kind of slides, thinking about number one, what's the concept? Number two, a few visuals around it. Number three is how you feel you can execute this. And number four is, really thinking about in strategy of, how might we market this? Who's our target audience? Just those really basic kind of going back to those high level things you think about when you're creating a project, which helps keep everybody on a little bit of the same page. So you're not really kind of deep diving too much into how you want to make that happen. I think it's a really important process, but I think obviously having all the parties on the same page and having the same kind of collective vision, I think is a really great first step for making that happen. So that's pretty much how we work at the moment as well, and then can work in depth, but really great pager, great one pager, great deck to support that. It's really
amazing.
helpful.
All right, well, I'm out of questions. If anyone else has anything to drop into the chat just in the next couple of minutes. Otherwise, we will thank Anna very, very much for your time. I know it's precious, and we look forward to catching up with you soon. Thanks everyone for dropping in, and hopefully we can do a few more of these talks maybe in second semester. We do have
one in there.
One question, about collaborations with universities.
I do collaborate with universities. Interestingly, you mentioned that. We probably should have more talks about RMIT. I probably have about half a dozen university collections that I'm working on, and that could be anything from science and technology as well to museums and galleries and arts. I'm also working on a very exciting ancient history project, which I can't tell you much about at the moment. That is a university collaboration, but watch this space in the next couple of weeks. That's coming out. And look, we do collaborate. There's some really interesting programs that come through universities, particularly more experimental. A lot of great technology and tools are used in there. So we really love to leverage the support and expertise of those universities, whether it's for being firstly a presenting partner, but secondarily, who better to go to say, hey, look, we've got this new product coming out, or we're about to build this. Would you like to be part of the process and bring their knowledge and expertise to the table? So yes, we do. Yeah,
amazing. And as I mentioned previously, Anna is on our industry advisory committee, so I'm happy to facilitate contact and any questions from students or other staff around any of that stuff. Thank you very much, Anna. We'll let you go.
Thanks so much. Thank you for having me. Hopefully it's been of use. And please feel free to hit me up with any other questions that you may have as well.
All right. Thanks, Anna. Talk soon.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.